let's start. Okay. So I start with some motivation. So let M be a square matrix of size n with entries in Z. We denote by K of M its characteristic polynomial, and by norm of M its L2 norm. So there is a result of Eskin, Charmozes, and Nimisha in 1995-96 in 2 papers. So we assume that P equal to K of M is Q reducible. Then, as lambda goes to plus infinity among positive numbers, one get an estimate that cardinal number of integer matrices such that norm is bounded and characteristic polynomial is fixed. So this number goes, as lambda goes to infinity, as a constant that is computable on the power of lambda. So I think that A is a triangular number. I don't remember. So this can be viewed as an integral point on subvariety, the conjugacy class of the matrix M. So V is equal, I'll write like this, with G PGL N on H. H is a centralizer in G of the class of M. And we intersect, I call this the ball of radius lambda. So this number. Actually, what they show that this is equivalent to mu V of B lambda, where mu V is homogeneous measure on V of R. So the asymptotic number of points is the volume of the ball along the variety. So starting point is a circle of ideas that appears in Duke, already in Duke, Rudnick, and Cernak, and so Eskin and Macmillan in 93. So that's called the unfolding method. So we start with G over R above G of H of R, that is V of R. On the other side, we get G of R on gamma, where gamma is simply G of Z, arithmetic lattice. Of G of R. So here we have mu V homogeneous measure, and here I call this space X, and we got mu x homogeneous probability. So I explained roughly the ideas. From point here that is a class Hg, we associate some orbit. So that's a closed orbit in X. So gamma bracket is a point corresponding to the class gamma. And associated homogeneous proba. I'll write it mu of Hg. So actually there is a gamma intersected with H of R is lattice in H of R. That follows from hypothesis. Okay, so we'll go on. So z point gh is nearly a point gh in the orbit, in the gamma orbit, through the class coming from the neutral element. So actually, in the z points there are finitely many gamma orbits. It follows from, among other things, finiteness of class number, and can be also a result of Borel and Harish-Chandra. So when you get a point here, it means on the other side that the orbit goes through the point gamma. So you get this H orbit, you translate by G, and when it meets gamma again, it means that the point comes from the orbit. What is actually done is when Hg is next to the gamma orbit, up to epsilon, we detect this by saying that the proba measure I use against delta epsilon, when delta epsilon is approximation of unity of the Dirac measure at gamma, is nearly 1. It's something. So the question about counting integer points on lambda. So this problem becomes the question. So I take all these orbits coming from the ball, I integrate against approximation of unity, so according to the measure from V. So I take the mean. Does this converge to 1? Which is also the total mass of delta epsilon along the homogeneous measure on X. So actually one gets that so without this function, converges to mu x in the space of probability measures on X. So one gets some equidistribution. When I take a translate of these measures, and I take a mean along the ball of radius lambda, at the end one gets equidistribution on the space X. So strategy is the following. consider a converging sequence of translating measures. So, first part, Dani-Margolis linearization methods leads to the alternative. Either the limit of the sequence is 0, or limit is a proba. I mean the sequence is tight. So either all the mass goes to infinity, either all the mass doesn't go to, no mass goes to infinity when you have convergent sequence. So in the latter case of the alternative, one uses Ratner's theorem on unipotent flows, and it teaches us that limit is homogeneous measure. It's right as mu Lg, where L is a bigger group than H. It contains a conjugate of H. So to succeed with this strategy, we need to prove two things. Firstly, then we have non-divergence. The family of translated measure is tight, cannot go to infinity, or put some measure at infinity. And B, what they call non-focusing. That means that in this, L is equal to G almost every time. Or more precisely, that B lambda, the ball, do no weight directions leading to limit measure like this. So here we are interested in the first issue. So I'll come back to Dani-Margolis linearization method. So we started from problem of counting points, reduce it to a problem of dynamics on the right, and now we reduce it to a problem of linear algebra. So recall that PGL1 of R over PGN of Z, so our space X, is a space, it identifies the space of unimodular lattices in Rn. So to the class G gamma, we associate this lattice. Then we use Möller's criterion, which asserts that a family of lattices is bounded if only if the covolume, it means the volume of fundamental domain, is bounded. It's okay here because unimodular means fundamental domain as volume 1. And a second thing, that the norm or smallest vector, I call it systole, it means non-zero vector, is bounded below. So here, to go to the infinity in the space of unimodular lattices, we need to get that at least one vector, smallest vector, is going to 0. Okay. Let's continue. So, which page? Yeah. So now we consider a parameter family where omega belongs to omega, which is a Probas space. So, following work of Dany and Margulis, and so Eskin, Moise-Sancha, and then Kleinbock and Tomanov. Inside nice classes of such parametrization. For instance, Dany Margulis means that omega is an interval and these functions are polynomial. That's an example of such classes, a such class. So we get, if we stick to one class of parameterization, that a family, so the parameters family is I, gives rise to a tight family of measures, of Probas measures. I call it mu A. So how is built mu I? You take omega. With the gi, it goes to g, and with projection, it goes to x. X equals g on m. So you have the Probas here, and you're taking the image mu I. So you have a parametered family of lattices. You have a measure on the parameters, and take the image measure. So we are interested in such classes, and it says that it's tight if only if for all v non-zero vector so the subset this subset cannot go uniformly to 0 in V. So I have a family of subsets of V equal Rn to in Rn. Okay. Along sequences En in. So to understand if permuted families of probability measures is tight, we have to, for each vector, to follow this kind of subset. So there is two fits in this method on this result. So first one is that we only need to control this quantity. GI. Yeah. So we have to show that this infimum of maximum is more than 0. So just translating this sentence. Instead of infimum of E omega non-zero of so the important thing is here I get this here instead of here. I mean we can choose a vector v independently of I on omega. So this so this quantity choose this. This quantity is a systole of the lattice the n j omega. So instead of studying families of lattices, and for each lattice we choose the smallest vector, here we can choose a vector uniformly. On the second fit of this method, so 1, 2, it reduces tightness, a question about measures, to uniform convergence. We mean to show that this function on omega doesn't converge uniformly to 0. Okay. I'll start here. So this reduces the non-divergence issue. To the following question. Of Nimesha. So the setup is the following. Given a subgroup H of G, and G is acting on a space V, given also omega in H, say it's bounded, and it's non-empty open subset, so of H, and given also a vector V in V, the question is, so I take the vector V, I take a piece of orbit along H, and then I'm applying an element G of capital G. Can this set go to 0 uniformly along varying G in capital G? So that's just a problem about globes in finite dimensional vector spaces. So I start with some remarks. So if G belongs to the centralizer inside G of H, and if G applied to V is going to 0, then we get G omega V is equal to omega JV. This commits with H and this is inside H. And this is going to 0, this is bounded, so it goes to 0 uniformly. Uniformly on omega. So actually one hopes that if G is not in the centralizer but goes to infinity in the opposite directions, then G will deform omega a lot. I mean, you write G omega V is equal to G omega G minus 1 G V. And you hope that if this goes to 0 but G is not following centralizer, then this subset will be conjugated a lot, so that from one element here we can pick this small vector and get a bigger norm. So the theorem I'm going to present is the following. So it's done with Misha, 2005, and it's published in my thesis, 2009. So G is semi-simple, real globe. H in G is what I call reductive in G, but I'm gonna use only examples, so don't focus on it. One has a decomposition. So G is equal to Y times. So there's a subset that is complementary to the centralizer of H. And along the subset, we answer positively to the question, or negatively. Yeah. Such that for any representation with a V on any norm on V, any omega in H bounded non-empty, or I can just ask Zariski dance subset. So if it's open topologically, it's okay. There exists a constant, strictly positive, such that for any V in V or any Y into this mysterious subset Y, is bounded below. So given non-zero V, even if I fix V non-zero, even by changing Y, I cannot bring this subset uniformly to 0. I mean that this is a supremum of this subset. Okay. Actually, this lemma or theorem was used in the case of Tori already in the paper of Eskimo Zesha, but because they didn't have the general case, they had to do a lot of tricks. Alors, to simplify, we make some reduction. We assume what do you say? That G is equal to GLV. So on the rows morphism rotation, it's just the identity of GLV into itself. There's a fact. Saying that H is relative in G means that the H module V is semi-simple. Also, we assume also that V is Euclidean. I mean, we can change the number of V, it doesn't change the two laws of the theorem. And that H isotypic components are orthogonal. So that's simplifying assumptions. So first we use the polar decomposition. Yeah, we also say V is equal to Rn. So this is the writing is equal to On of R times positive definite symmetric matrices. So you write G is equal K times S. And we see that so we are interested in this because K is act by isometry. This is equal to, so I just use decomposition is equal to S. So we can assume when we want to study this that G belongs to this. So we may assume G is equal to S is symmetric and positive definite. Actually, it means that G writes exponential of sigma with sigma symmetric. So now I'm going to define the set, Michaud set Y. We say that G belongs to Y if sigma is orthogonal to the Lie algebra of the centralizer. So I'll write Z for this Lie algebra. So what does it mean? Explicitly means that trace of sigma Z is equal to 0 for all Z in this Lie algebra. So at the level of the Lie algebras, we have this decomposition. So this is a Lie algebra of K is equal to On. So this decomposed this orthogonal, this is a symmetric matrices. And this is equal against a further decomposition. So I decompose this into the part that is orthogonal to Z and the part that belongs to Z. And there is a theorem of Mostow in the 50s that this decomposition at the level of the Lie algebras, when taking the exponential, give a decomposition of G. So we have G is equal to K times exponential of this times exponential of so the intersection. And actually this is included in the centralizer because it belongs to the Lie algebra. And this subset is what I will call Y. The Y in the theorem. So now I'm going to say how to prove the theorem for such element Y. So from the beginning, we know that we can forget about K and take an element Y is exponential of sigma with a sigma symmetric and orthogonal to Z. So we want to understand this supremum omega appartenant omega of Y omega V. And actually, because omega is bounded, if I put something here, so little v, it's gonna only change up to constant depending on omega, on how it's acting on v. So and here on this formula, I stressed upon this because here we recognize regular, I mean a polynomial function on H with values in V, or it's a vector of matrix coefficients. So this function, it belongs to some finite dimensional replantation W inside regular functions tensor with V. So actually here it's a regular action, and here it's a trivial action. So on W, the supremum of for F in W, the supremum along omega of the V norm defines a norm on this finite dimensional space. And here I use that omega is Zariski dense. So no function here can be 0 on omega without being a 0 function. Actually, what we only need is that this defines a norm. That's the only condition on omega in the proof. So you can even replace omega by a finite subset of H. It's big enough. So that none of these matrix coefficients is identically 0 on omega without being 0. No. So I use the fact that H is linearly reductive. Actually, it's, the condition H reductive in G means that H is linearly reductive on any matrix coefficient coming from representation of G. Actually, if H is reductively grouped, and its center is acting by semi-simple elements. So the representations W allows a unique H equivalent projector onto the fixed points. So there is an operation that brings a function f to its fixed component in terms of representation. For instance, if H is a compact group, it's an integral along K. or result back to a measure. If it's so there's generalization coming from H in highly reductive. So the trick now is instead of bounding the norm of our function, bounding below, we only need to bound below the image. So I call this PW of the function. Okay. So we have an element in a norm finite dimension vector space. We make an application into another vector space. Because dimensions are finite, it is bounded. And to bound below the first, it suffices to bound below the other. So, we use that this projector is uniquely defined. Is actually functorial in W. In this case, I use this to show that PW of omega goes to omega y omega minus 1 times v is equal to so projector of omega going to omega y omega minus 1 and then multiplying par v. Here I'm working in endomorphism of v tensored by v with adjoint representation, and here the trivial. So this comes from functoriality. And this is also, in this actually, the projector of the representation of under v is also equal to the projector onto the centralizer of H. So this is equal to projector on Z omega I y minus 1 times V. So I'm working here in then tensor by V. So now, what do we have? We know that y is written as exponential of sigma with sigma symmetric and orthogonal to Z. So to finish a proof, I only say what happens in two cases. Example, so if H is acting on V irreducibly, trivially, first, trivial action, trivial. Then I've got that Z is equal to all ZG, I mean endomorphism of V, and the projection on Z is just the identity. So, because sigma is orthogonal to Z, it means that sigma equals 0, and y exponential of sigma is identity of V, and so y times V is bigger than norm of V. So, it's not very interesting. Example 2, H is acting on V irreducibly. So in this case, by Schur lemma, R is just given by homothesis, Z is given by homothesis, and the projector onto Z is just the trace operator, and then multiplying by the identity. And now we have that trace of exponential of sigma is written in some So sigma is symmetric, so you can diagonalize exponential of lambda I with, so sigma orthogonal to Z means trace of sigma equal sum of lambda I equals 0. And if I use, I think that n here, that's just convexity of the exponential function. So we'll finish by a convexity argument about the exponential. So actually, in general, one can decompose the computation into H isotypic components. The statement I use is something like proposition V a finite dimensional Euclidean space with sigma self-adjoint on P a non-zero orthogonal projector. So in this case, size equality, trace exponential of sigma on P rank of P exponential S of P So I use this with P is a projector associated to the eigenspaces of S. On using it the right way, we get what we need. Actually, the projection onto the centralizer can be expressed as some good traces operators. So I finished by discussing a little about non-Archimedean case. So actually we'll replace R by say QP for simplicity. So theorem 2009. So that's explicitly the same. G semi-simple over QP. H inside G reductive in G. Then one has a decomposition. G of QP is equal to Y times centralizer of H on taking the QP points, such that for any representation G to GLV, norm on V, omega bounded on the Zariski dance in H of QP. There exists a constant such that for all V in V, for all Y in Y, this kind of subset of V cannot go uniformly to 0 because we have an explicit inequality. So if you want to get such result, there are some issues that appear. Firstly, there is no analog inside the G of QP of the symmetric space sim++ equal exponential or symmetric matrices. We don't have a Mosto decomposition theorem. And there's nothing about convexity of the exponential function. Actually, the exponential has a very small radius of convergence in PADX. And there another issue that appears in positive characteristic. So the idea is here, and now we're gonna link to the previous talk. So one uses the Berkovich space Gn associated to G over Qp. And what we saw just before, and a copy of the Buatit building of G over Qp appearing inside the analytic-fied space. So I'm just gonna give an example. So we take G is equal to SL2. We take H is equal to a diagonal torus, a copy of G1 in SL2. So H is a open subset H an of P1 analytic and contains a line of Gauss norms, Gauss points, in the setting of Amory's course. So we can go, there is 0 point that doesn't belong, and then so this is in P1. This is an infinity point in P1, and we have a line of Gauss points inside the analytic space associated to H. So inside SL2 analytic-fied, there is a P+1 regular tree, or homogeneous tree of valency P+1. So here I make the picture for P equal to 2. It goes like this. We can understand vertices as tabulator of bolts under the action of SL2 over P1, or this is some case of what Bertrand explained. And the inclusion of H in G gave rise to something in the building. We can see the H, for example, as a line sitting in the tree. Gave a geodesic. So actually, the analogous of the polar decomposition is that up to a compact affinoid subgroup. So I explain roughly. G reduces, or SL2 in my case, in my picture, reduces to its 3. To understand a point up to a compact subgroup in the analytic setting, we can go back to the building. So that's analogous of the symmetric space I got earlier. So now, to understand the tree, it suffices to understand the lines. It's covered by lines. And I just finished to explain what is analog of the convexity of the exponential function. So, say if I got A in no, it's QP of H, polynomial function, regular function, can even be analytic. Then the graph of the norm function, so this is a real function going to 0. So the graph is restricted to the line, to the yellow line, or this one. Is the Newton polygon of F. In logarithmic coordinates. And it is convex. Actually, the more general result is I have a group G, and there is a building to the analytic space. I take the norm of some analytic function on G. Then, when restricted to the building and to apartments, it will be convex for the linear structure. So, this kind of results allows to answer this issue. Okay, that was a final ring.